5 daughter-in-law slaps me for my house keys, the shocking family betrayal. The slap came so fast I didn't have time to react. My glasses flew off, shattering on the elegant ballroom floor as 130 guests watched in absolute silence. My cheek burned, but the pain in my chest was far worse. Juliet, my daughter-in-law, had just slapped me on her wedding day because I refused to hand over the keys to my apartment. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she screamed at me in front of everyone. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved to help me as I crouched down, trembling, to pick up my broken glasses. Some guests looked away, uncomfortable. Others whispered among themselves, but no one, absolutely no one, dared to defend the poor old mother-in-law who had just been publicly humiliated. My son Ethan stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the floor as if I were invisible. "You're not welcome here anymore," Juliet continued, smoothing her pristine wedding gown. "Ethan and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." Her words were pure venom. For months I had endured her condescending comments about my worn-out clothes, my old car, my simple life. But this had crossed a line that should never have been touched. I rose slowly, feeling all eyes on me like sharp daggers. Tears streamed down my face, but inside something had changed forever. That slap wasn't just a physical blow, it was the final straw. For years I had kept a low profile, living with humility and discretion. I had secrets no one, not even my own son, knew. Memories of the last few months began to flood my mind as I slowly walked toward the exit. I remembered when Juliet first came to my apartment 2 years ago. Her face fell when she saw my modest home, my old furniture, my small kitchen. "Seriously, this is where Ethan's mom lives?" she had asked him, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. From that moment on, every visit had been silent torture. "Aura, you should move to a smaller place," she had told me 3 months ago during a family dinner. "At your age, you can't maintain such a big apartment. Besides, Ethan and I are thinking of having kids soon. We'll need more space." Her fake smile didn't fool anyone, except my son, who seemed to lose his personality whenever she spoke, acting like a puppet on a string. The humiliations had escalated gradually. First it was the comments about my clothes. "Aurora, don't you have anything more modern to wear?" Then about my car. "That car is so old. It's dangerous for you to drive that." Next it was my part-time job at the local flower shop. "I don't understand why a woman your age is still working instead of relaxing." Each phrase was a small poison dagger stabbing at my self-esteem. My name is Aurora Hughes. I am 68 years old, and all my life I have been a woman who prefers discretion over ostentation. I work at a small flower shop 3 days a week. I drive a 10-year-old car. I buy my clothes at discount stores. To the outside world, especially to Juliet, I am just a middle-class widow living on a fixed income. But that's exactly the image I have carefully cultivated for decades. What none of those people looking at me with pity knew was that my life had been completely different before my husband passed. My husband, Robert, had not been the office worker everyone believed. We had made a conscious decision to live modestly, to keep our true wealth a secret, to protect our family's privacy in a way that I now understood had been prophetic. As I walked out of the ballroom, the guests' conversations followed me like a toxic cloud. "Poor thing, she looks so fragile," whispered Juliet's aunt. "The bride is right. That woman can't take care of herself anymore," added Ethan's cousin. "She should be in a retirement home, not living alone," another guest commented with false compassion. Each word was like acid pouring on open wounds. The cool air conditioning in the ballroom contrasted sharply with the suffocating heat in my chest. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my cell phone in my worn black purse, a purse I had used for 5 years, not because I couldn't afford a new one, but because I valued practicality over appearances, something my daughter-in-law would never understand. I dialed a number I knew by heart, a number I hadn't used in over a year because I had naively hoped it would never be necessary. "Carlos, it's Aurora. I need you to come to the Royal Oaks Ballroom immediately. Yes, right now. Bring the documents you know about. It's time for them to know the truth." My voice trembled, but there was a firmness in it I hadn't felt in a long time. "Are you sure, Mrs. Hughes?" Carlos asked, his professional but concerned voice steady. "Once we do this, there's no turning back." I glanced back at the ballroom one last time. Juliet was laughing with her friends, probably telling them how she had put her useless mother-in-law in her place. Ethan stood by her side, smiling weakly, showing not a single ounce of remorse for what he had just witnessed. "Completely sure," I replied. 30 minutes, Carlos. No more." I hung up and walked toward my car with determined steps. For the first time in years, I was going to drop the mask I had used to protect my family. For the first time, they were going to meet the real Aurora Hughes. And when that happened, when reality hit their perfect fake worlds, they would understand the true meaning of regret. The parking lot was quiet, lit by streetlights that cast long shadows between the cars. I sat in my old sedan and waited. 30 minutes for their lives to change forever. 30 minutes for them to discover they had made the biggest mistake of their lives by humiliating the woman who had secretly been taking care of them more than they could ever imagine. While I waited in my car, memories of how I had reached this moment flooded my mind like an unstoppable avalanche. It had all started exactly 2.5 years ago when Ethan came to my apartment with that nervous smile I knew so well from when he was a boy. "Mom, I want you to meet someone very special," he had told me. And there she was, Juliet, with her perfectly styled hair, her designer clothes, and that smile that didn't reach her eyes. From the very first moment, I knew something wasn't right. The way she looked around my apartment, evaluating every corner with thinly veiled disdain, told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. "How cozy," she had murmured, looking at my secondhand furniture and my sun-faded curtains. Her tone suggested the opposite. Ethan, completely blinded by what he believed was love, didn't notice the condescension in her voice. That first dinner was a silent disaster. Juliet barely touched the food I had lovingly prepared, claiming she was watching her figure. When I asked about her family, she gave evasive answers, but not before asking about my financial situation with alarming curiosity. "And how do you manage on a widow's pension, Aurora? It must be hard to get by on so little money," she had said with fake concern. What Juliet didn't know was that I had been observing her as much as she was observing me. Over the next few months, I began to notice patterns that put me on high alert. Every time they visited, she'd make comments about how outdated everything was, about how I deserved something better in my golden years. But her eyes always lingered on what truly mattered: the prime location of the building, the panoramic view from my balcony, the size of the rooms. One day, while Ethan was in the bathroom, I heard her speaking softly on the phone in my kitchen. "Yes, Mom. His mom's apartment is in a super expensive area. If I can get her to move to a smaller place, we could stay here until we have our own place. She's so naive. She'll probably even thank us for helping her with the transition." Her words cut through me like a knife, but I kept my composure when she returned, pretending nothing had happened. From that moment on, every interaction between us became a carefully orchestrated performance. She played the concerned daughter-in-law, and I played the vulnerable old woman who needed guidance. But inside, I was gathering information, watching every move, understanding her true motivations. It was a game of chess where we both thought we were winning. The following months brought a gradual escalation in her manipulation. First, the subtle suggestions. "Aurora, I've seen some lovely apartments for people your age with all-inclusive services and no maintenance worries." Then came the more direct pressures. "You can't keep living alone at your age. It's dangerous. What if you fall and no one finds out for days?" Each argument was meant to make me feel helpless. Even Ethan began echoing her words like a trained parrot. "Mom, Juliet is right. Maybe it would be better for you to consider moving to a more manageable place. Seeing him become that woman's puppet was more painful than any insult. The son I had raised with love and sacrifice now saw me as an obstacle to his happiness. The psychological campaign intensified after they announced their engagement. Visits became more frequent, but also more tense. Juliet began bringing real estate magazines and brochures for senior communities. "I'm just exploring options for you, Aurora. I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible," she'd say, spreading them on my coffee table like a business deal. But I had been doing my own research. One afternoon, while they were out running wedding errands, I called an old friend in real estate. "Amelia, I need you to investigate something for me," I told her. "There's a couple very interested in my apartment, and I want to know more about their real financial situation." What she discovered chilled me to the bone. Juliet and Ethan were neck-deep in debt. The wedding they were planning cost more than $50,000, completely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they were renting was on the verge of eviction for non-payment. The luxury cars they drove were financed beyond their means. Their lifestyle was a facade built on suffocating debt. Suddenly, everything made sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that united them. It was desperation. And my apartment, in one of the city's most exclusive areas, was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a slap to the soul. My son, the boy I had raised with honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. He had allowed an ambitious woman to convince him to see his own mother as a resource to exploit instead of someone to love and respect. In the weeks before the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. "Aura, you can't keep being so selfish," Juliet told me just 3 days before the ceremony. "Ethan and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing." Her words no longer wore the mask of fake concern. It was a direct demand disguised as a family favor. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Carlos, my financial advisor, and the only man I had completely trusted since my husband Robert's death. "Carlos, I need you to prepare some documents. It's possible I'll very soon have to reveal information I've kept secret for years." His voice turned serious immediately. "Mrs. Hughes, are you sure this is the right time?" he asked, with the wisdom of someone who had managed my affairs for more than a decade. "Once this information is public, you can't take it back. The consequences could be devastating for family relationships." But I had already made up my mind. The family I had tried to protect with my silence had chosen to betray me. And now, sitting in my car in the ballroom parking lot, waiting for Carlos to arrive with the documents that would change everything, I realized the moment of truth had come. 25 more minutes, and Juliet, Ethan, and all those guests who had looked at me with pity would discover who Aurora Hughes really was. 25 more minutes, and their perfect worlds, built on lies and greed, would crumble like sandcastles. The night breeze rustled the leaves of the trees around the parking lot, creating dancing shadows under the lights. It was strangely poetic that on such a beautiful night, so many illusions were about to die forever. 20 minutes had passed since my call to Carlos, and every second felt like an eternity. From my car, I could see the golden lights of the ballroom, hear the cheerful music and laughter spilling out of the open windows. It was surreal to think that in just a few minutes, that celebration would turn into a nightmare for the main players. I closed my eyes and let the most painful memories of the last few months flood my mind. I needed to remember exactly why I had reached this point of no return. The biggest humiliation had happened just 2 weeks before the wedding, during what Juliet had called an important family meeting. She had arrived at my apartment accompanied not only by Ethan but also by her parents, a perfectly planned ambush. "Aurora, we want to talk to you about your future," Juliet's mother began, a haughty woman who looked at me as if I were a bothersome insect. "We believe it's time for you to make responsible decisions about your life," continued Juliet's father, a burly man who surveyed my apartment with the eyes of an appraiser evaluating a property. "At your age, living alone in such a big place is not only unnecessary but dangerous. What if you have a medical emergency and no one finds out for days?" Their words were rehearsed, too perfect to be spontaneous. Ethan sat silently throughout the conversation, nodding occasionally like a well-trained puppet. Seeing him there, sitting beside a family that treated me like an obstacle, was like watching the son I had raised die before my eyes. "Mom," he finally said in a voice I no longer recognized. "They're right. Juliet and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you moved to a place more appropriate for your age." "Appropriate for my age?" I repeated, feeling anger start to boil inside me. "And who gets to decide what's appropriate for me? You?" Juliet's mother exchanged a knowing look with her husband, as if my words had confirmed something they'd already discussed. "Aurora, we understand this can be difficult to accept, but you must think about what's best for Ethan and Juliet." "What's best for them?" I murmured, beginning to understand the true dimension of the conspiracy woven behind my back. "And I suppose my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life, right?" The awkward silence that followed was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every psychological pressure. Juliet took control then, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. "Aurora, it's not just about the apartment, it's about your well-being. We've been doing research and found a wonderful residence for people your age. It has 24-hour medical services, social activities, prepared meals. You could make friends with people who understand what you're going through." Her fake smile made me nauseous. "What I'm going through?" I asked, feigning confusion. "And what exactly do you think I'm going through, Juliet?" She looked at Ethan for support before answering. "Well, loneliness, financial uncertainty, the fear of not being able to take care of yourself. It's normal at your age, Aurora. You don't have to be ashamed of needing help." The audacity of this 28-year-old woman telling me what was normal at my age left me speechless for a moment. But then I saw something in her eyes that chilled me, the absolute certainty that she had a right to my life, my home, my decisions. To her, I was no longer a person with autonomy, but an obstacle to be removed with as little resistance as possible. "We've run the numbers," Juliet's father continued, pulling out a folder they had clearly prepared in advance. "The cost of the residence would be approximately $2,500 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have enough money to cover it for many years. And there would still be some left over to help Ethan and Juliet with their initial marriage expenses." There it was, the naked, raw truth. It wasn't about my well-being or my safety. It was about money. It was about converting my home into cash to finance their unsustainable lifestyle. "And if I refuse?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Aurora," Ethan said, his voice sounding rehearsed, "we hope it won't be necessary to take more drastic measures, but if your mental health deteriorates to the point that you can't make rational decisions—" The implicit threat was crystal clear. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would seek legal ways to declare me incompetent. They had done their research. They had planned. They had prepared the ground to take everything I owned, by force if necessary. The son I had raised with so much love was sitting right there, allowing strangers to threaten his own mother. That night, after they left, with my firm refusal still echoing in the air, I cried for the first time in years, not out of sadness, but for the definitive death of the illusions I had held about my family. I had called Carlos immediately. "I need you to investigate something urgently," I told him through tears. "I want to know exactly what the real financial situation is for my son and his fiancée. Everything. Debts, income, liabilities, everything." The results of that investigation had been devastating. Ethan earned $45,000 annually as a sales manager, but had debts of more than $80,000 on credit cards. Juliet worked part-time as an image consultant, making maybe $4,000 a year, but spent as if she had an executive salary. Together, they owed more than $120,000, not counting the loans they had taken out for the wedding. The apartment they rented for $2,000 a month was 3 months behind on payments. The cars they drove were financed with payments that took up 60% of their combined income. Their main credit card was maxed out, and they had started using cash advances to pay other debts. They were in a financial freefall, and my apartment represented their only hope of salvation. But there was something else in Carlos's report that completely broke my heart. For the past 6 months, Ethan had been regularly calling banks and insurance companies, asking about loans against his elderly mother's property. He'd been asking about legal procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been planning my systematic dispossession for months. The most painful information came at the end of the report. According to a private investigator Carlos had hired, Juliet had been telling her friends that she had sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less attractive man because his mother had valuable properties and no competitive heirs. To her, marrying Ethan wasn't love. It was a strategic investment in my estate. That revelation had been the final straw. For weeks, I had considered simply revealing my true financial situation to them, thinking that maybe the shock would make them reconsider their behavior. But after reading that report, I understood it wasn't about money or desperation. It was about a pure, calculated greed that had corrupted my son until he was unrecognizable. The days leading up to the wedding had been torture. Every phone call from Ethan was new pressure to reconsider my position. Every visit from Juliet included poisonous comments about my stubbornness and selfishness. They had started treating me as if I were already a senile old woman whose opinions didn't matter. The night before the wedding, Ethan had made his last attempt. "Mom, tomorrow is the most important day of my life. Please don't ruin it by being difficult. Juliet just wants what's best for all of us." His words were the final confirmation that I had lost my son forever. The man who was getting married the next day was no longer the boy I had raised with so much love and sacrifice. And now, sitting in my car waiting for Carlos, I realized everything had led to this inevitable moment. It wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was about justice, about showing them the consequences of their actions, about teaching them that some lines should never have been crossed. 15 more minutes, and everything would change forever. My hands trembled as I dialed the number for Joseph, my neighbor from the apartment next door, a 70-year-old man who had been a silent witness to all the tense visits of the last few months. "Joseph, it's Aurora. I need to ask you for a very important favor," I said, my voice shaking. "Could you go to my apartment and bring me the brown folder from the second drawer of my desk? Yes, right now, it's urgent." Joseph had been like a brother to me since Robert passed away, and I knew I could trust him without him asking questions. While I waited, I remembered the conversation I'd had with Joseph just a week earlier. He had witnessed, from his balcony, when Juliet arrived with a real estate appraiser without notifying me. "Aurora, that girl brought a man with a briefcase who was measuring your apartment from the outside," he told me, concern heavy in his voice. "When they saw me, they left quickly. I don't like what's happening at all." Joseph had been the first to notice the subtle changes in Ethan's behavior over the last few months. "Your son doesn't greet me like he used to," he had observed. "He used to stay and chat when he came to visit. Now he rushes in and out as if he's ashamed of something." His words had confirmed what my heart already knew. I had lost my son long before the slap that night. The folder I had asked Joseph for contained documents no one in my family had ever seen. Bank certificates, property titles, investment records that Robert and I had kept secret for decades. Documents that proved the poor widow living on a modest pension was actually a woman with enough resources to change lives with a single decision. 10 minutes later, Joseph appeared in the parking lot with the folder in his hands. "Aura, what's going on? You look very upset," he asked as he handed me the documents. "It has to do with Ethan's wedding," I explained briefly what had happened in the ballroom, and I saw his face harden with every detail. "That woman is a viper," he muttered. "I always knew it." "Joseph, in a few minutes, a man named Carlos will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting for him here," I asked. "And Joseph, after tonight, many things are going to change. I want you to know you've always been like family to me." His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. "You're family to me too, Aurora. Do what you have to do." As Joseph returned to the building, I opened the folder and began to review documents I hadn't looked at in months. The first was a bank statement showing a balance of $400,000 in an investment account. The second was the property title for a downtown office building that generated monthly rent of $50,000. The third was the deed to a beach house I had bought as an investment 10 years ago. Robert had been a genius at investments, starting with a small import business and turning it into a silent empire. Together, we had made the decision to live modestly, to protect our privacy and our family's security. "Visible wealth attracts problems," Robert used to say. "Invisible wealth gives you power." I never imagined I would have to use that power against my own son. Each document in that folder represented years of hard work and smart decisions. The flower shop where I worked 3 days a week wasn't because I needed the money, but because I liked staying active and connected to the community. The old car I drove wasn't due to economic limitations, but because I had learned that unnecessary ostentation only brings problems. My apartment, the one Juliet so coveted, was actually the least valuable property in my portfolio. I had bought it not for its economic value, but for the memories it held. It was where Robert and I had spent our last years together, where we had planned our future, where he had passed away in my arms after a brave battle with cancer. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything for Ethan and Juliet. For the last 3 years, since my son had started having financial problems, I had been secretly paying many of his debts. The credit card payments he thought came from a work bonus were actually coming from my account. The special discount on his rent that he thought he had negotiated with his landlord was money I transferred monthly. Without Ethan knowing, I had been subsidizing his irresponsible lifestyle for years. The luxurious apartment he lived in, the car he drove, even some of the expenses for the wedding that was taking place at that very moment had all been made possible by my secret financial support. I had thought I was helping my son through a difficult time, not realizing I was funding his transformation into someone I no longer recognized. The bank records showed monthly transfers totaling $4,500 that had kept the sinking ship of Ethan's financial life afloat. Money he thought came from work bonuses or tax refunds, when in reality it was his mother desperately trying to protect him from the consequences of his own irresponsible choices. The irony was devastating. While Juliet humiliated me for supposedly being an economic burden on their future marriage, I was literally the only reason they could afford that marriage. While they were planning to take my apartment to solve their financial problems, I had been secretly solving those problems for years. I closed the folder and looked toward the ballroom once more. The lights still glowed, the music still played, the guests were still celebrating. But in less than 5 minutes, Carlos would arrive with the final documents I needed. In less than 5 minutes, the process of cutting all the financial threads I had used to protect a son who had chosen to betray me would begin. This is not revenge, I reminded myself. This is justice. This is about teaching them that actions have consequences, that greed has a price, that family is not something you can sell for financial convenience. I had tried to protect Ethan from reality for too long, and that protection had corrupted him until he became unrecognizable. Headlights approached the parking lot, illuminating the night in a harsh white light that momentarily blinded me. It was Carlos, punctual as always, arriving with the documents that would change everything forever. I got out of my car and walked toward him, feeling how each step took me further away from the Aurora I had been and closer to the woman I needed to become. "Mrs. Hughes," Carlos said as he stepped out of his car, a legal brief under his arm. "Are you completely sure about this? Once we go in there will be no way to undo what's about to happen." I looked toward the ballroom one last time, where my son and his new wife were probably still celebrating their victory over the useless old woman they had just humiliated. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Carlos," I said. "It's time for them to meet the real Aurora Hughes." Carlos opened his folder under the parking lot light and began showing me the documents he had prepared with his usual efficiency. "Mrs. Hughes, here is the order for the immediate suspension of all bank transfers you've been making in Ethan Hughes's name," he said, pointing to the first paper. "Also, here is the notice of cancellation of the lease agreement that you had confidentially guaranteed. The landlord will receive this document tomorrow morning." I took the papers with trembling but determined hands. Each document represented a thread I had carefully woven for years to protect my son. And now I was cutting those threads one by one. "And the payment for the ballroom?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Cancelled," Carlos confirmed. "The deposit you had guaranteed will be withdrawn tonight. They'll have until tomorrow to find another form of payment." The magnitude of what I was about to do hit me like a cold wave. For 3 years, I had been the invisible safety net keeping Ethan and Juliet's lives afloat. The apartment they lived in, the car he drove, even the wedding taking place that very moment, all had been possible because of my secret support. And now, in a single night, I was about to withdraw all of it for good. "Carlos, I want you to understand something," I said, signing each document with a determination I hadn't felt in years. "This isn't cruelty or revenge. This is the only way they'll learn the real value of things. For too long, I protected them from the consequences of their actions, and that protection turned them into people I don't even recognize." "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Hughes," Carlos replied, genuine respect in his voice. "In my 30 years as a financial advisor, I've seen many families destroyed by greed and ingratitude. What you're doing requires more courage than most people have." His words gave me the final strength I needed. We walked together toward the ballroom entrance, and with each step, my heart beat faster. But it wasn't nervousness. It was a strange mix of sadness for what I had lost and anticipation for what I was about to regain. My dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being instead of a resource to be exploited. The music stopped abruptly when we entered the ballroom. 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us, confusion written on every face. Some recognized Carlos immediately. After all, he'd handled the financial affairs of several prominent families for decades. His presence at a social event usually meant something serious was about to happen. Juliet was the first to react. "What are you doing here, Aurora?" she shouted from the center of the dance floor, where she'd been posing for photos with Ethan. "You already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for one night?" Her voice carried the arrogance I knew so well, but underneath it, I detected a flicker of nervousness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carlos said clearly and professionally, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson." A deep silence followed. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Guests began pulling out their phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Ethan slowly approached, his face pale, eyes full of confusion. "What's going on here, Mom?" he asked, his voice shaky now, no longer confident like when he had humiliated me minutes earlier. "Who is this man? And why is he talking about legal matters?" I could see his hands tremble as he adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture from childhood. "Ethan," I said, my voice firmer than it had been in months, "this is Carlos Jones, my financial and legal advisor. He's here to deliver documents I think you'll find very enlightening." Carlos opened his folder and took out the first document. Mr. Ethan Hughes, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother provided for your lease agreement has been immediately canceled. Your landlord will be informed tomorrow morning, and you'll have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property. All the color drained from Ethan's face. Financial guarantee? He murmured, staring at me, horror dawning in his eyes. Mom, what is he talking about? But I could tell. Some part of him already knew. He'd always suspected his financial luck wasn't natural, but he'd chosen not to ask questions because the answers might have been too uncomfortable. Also, Carlos continued relentlessly, the monthly transfers of $4,500 that your mother has been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. This includes payments for credit cards, car insurance, and other expenses you believed were being covered by other sources. Juliet gasped, her voice echoing through the ballroom. That's impossible, she cried, rushing toward us, her wedding dress dragging across the floor. Ethan doesn't have a rich mother. Look at how she lives. Look at her clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a miserable pension. Her hysteria was evident, and murmurs spread through the crowd. Finally, Carlos said, pulling out the last document, the guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been canceled. The ballroom management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight. His words hit the room like a bomb. Guests shifted nervously toward the exits. You, Ethan whispered, staring at me, his mind struggling to catch up. This whole time, you've been paying for everything? His voice cracked, and for a brief moment I saw the small, lost boy he once was. For 3 years, Ethan, I said calmly, after all the storms I'd weathered inside. 3 years where I thought I was helping you through a rough time. 3 years I believed you'd recover, remember your values, and become the man I raised. 3 years I hoped you'd come back. Juliet began pacing, clutching her head in despair. This can't be happening. This isn't real, she screamed as guests watched her, torn between horror and fascination. You're a poor old woman. You work at a flower shop. You drive a 10-year-old car. You can't have money. Appearances are deceiving, Juliet, I said finally, feeling decades of quiet performance come to an end. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband and I believed visible wealth attracts problems. And we were right. We just never expected those problems to come from our own family. The music had long stopped. The only sounds were the newlyweds' ragged breathing and the murmurs of guests realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Many were recording now, instinctively knowing this story would become legend. Mom, Ethan said, his voice breaking, please, there has to be a way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything. But in his eyes, I saw the truth. He finally understood what he had truly lost. Not money, not comfort, but his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 35 years. The only way to fix this, Ethan, I said quietly, was not to break it in the first place. The ballroom fell into complete silence. 130 guests held their breath. Juliet stood frozen, her eyes darting between Carlos, the papers, and me, as if trying to find a crack in the reality collapsing around her. Ethan just stared at me with a look I'll never forget, a mix of shock, dawning comprehension, and horror. Mrs. Hughes, Carlos said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear, would you like me to proceed with reading the full financial details? His question hung in the air like a blade above the couple's heads. Guests moved closer, captivated. Please, Carlos, I said, calm and steady. I think everyone deserves to know the full truth. Juliet tried to interrupt with a desperate shriek, but Carlos raised his hand and continued with the precision of a surgeon. Over the last 36 months, he began consulting his papers, Mrs. Aurora Hughes has transferred a total of $162,000 to cover the living expenses of her son, Ethan Hughes, and his fiancée. This includes $48,000 for rent, $44,000 for credit cards, $18,000 for vehicle insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous expenses. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Guests exchanged shocked glances. Some even pulled out their phones to verify the numbers. Juliet's mother, who had been seated at the head table the whole time, slowly stood up, her face ghostly pale. Furthermore, Carlos continued firmly, Mrs. Hughes personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography, for a sum of $53,000, money which, as I mentioned earlier, is no longer available to cover these expenses. Juliet finally found her voice, but what came out was more a wail than words. This is impossible. It's a lie. No one can have that much money and live like a pauper. She turned to the guests, looking for support, but found only fascinated faces, and even a few amused ones. "My dear Juliet," I said with a calm that contrasted her hysteria, "you've just learned a very valuable lesson about judging people by appearances. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband, Robert, and I valued privacy above showing off. It turned out to be a very wise decision." Ethan finally reacted, walking toward me with hesitant steps. "Mom, please. There has to be an explanation. There has to be a way to resolve this. You can't destroy my life like this." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I felt a pang of maternal pain that almost made me waver. "Destroy your life?" I repeated, feeling the anger begin to rise again. "I'm destroying your life. Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 130 people? Wasn't it you who stood there silently while I was being humiliated? Wasn't it you who planned to strip me of my home?" The truth of my words rang through the ballroom like church bells. Several guests nodded, remembering the scene that had started all this drama. Some even had videos of Juliet's slap on their phones, digital evidence of the cruelty that had triggered this entire revelation. "But that was different," Ethan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "We didn't know. We didn't understand. We thought you really needed help." His excuses sounded pathetic even to himself, and I could see some guests exchanging looks of contempt. "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice rising for the first time all night. "You didn't know you were planning a family ambush to pressure me into selling my home. You didn't know you had brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge. You didn't know you were investigating legal ways to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate?" With every question, Ethan's posture shrank smaller and smaller. Carlos took the opportunity to pull another document from his folder. "Mr. Hughes, I must also inform you that your mother has decided to amend her will. All assets previously designated for you to inherit have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse." The impact of his words was like a silent explosion. Juliet staggered backward as if she had been physically hit. "You can't do that," she shrieked, her mask of composure finally breaking. "We're your family. Ethan is your only son. You can't disinherit him over a stupid fight." "A stupid fight?" I repeated, letting the words hang in the tense air. "Is that what you call a family conspiracy to strip an old woman of her home? Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on her wedding day?" My voice had turned cold as ice, and I saw some guests flinch. Juliet's father, who had remained silent through the entire confrontation, finally stepped forward, his face showing thinly veiled panic. "Mrs. Hughes, I think we're all just a little upset by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this privately once things calm down." His tone was that of a man realizing he had bet on the wrong side. "There's nothing to discuss in private," I said firmly. "Everything I had to say has been said right here, in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation. You chose to make this public, so my response will be public too." The guests' heads turned back and forth between us, as if watching a tennis match, captivated by every exchange. Carlos closed his folder with a sharp snap that echoed through the ballroom. Mrs. Hughes, all documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects will begin immediately." He turned to Ethan and Juliet with a professional, almost satisfied expression. "I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible." Juliet finally collapsed. She dropped into a nearby chair and began crying uncontrollably, her sobs echoing through the room. "Everything is ruined," she murmured through her tears. "Everything we planned, everything we worked for, it's all destroyed." Her wedding dress, once pristine, was now wrinkled and stained with tears. "No," I said, stepping toward her for the first time since the slap. "What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, and the lack of respect. What's destroyed is the illusion that you can treat people like objects and face no consequences." I stopped right in front of her, forcing her to look up. "This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness." Ethan went to his wife and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. "Juliet, we have to find a way to fix this. There has to be something we can do." But even as he spoke, I could see in his eyes that he knew it was too late. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. "There is a way to fix this, Ethan," I said, meeting his eyes for the first time in months without feeling pain. "You can learn from this. You can grow from this. You can become the man I hoped you'd be before greed corrupted you." My voice softened slightly. Despite everything, he was still my son. "But that growth will have to happen without my financial help, without my apartment, and without my inheritance. You'll have to do it the hard way, like everyone else." The ballroom remained in absolute silence. Everyone present knew they were witnessing the definitive end of a family. Carlos and I turned toward the exit, leaving behind a ballroom full of stunned guests and a newlywed couple whose perfect world had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. As we walked away, the silence behind us was suddenly broken by a voice I didn't expect to hear. "Wait, Aurora!" It was Lucy, Ethan's younger sister, who had been sitting quietly at a table in the back. She ran toward us, tears streaming down her face, her expression full of shock. "Aunt Aurora," Lucy said in a trembling voice, "I didn't know anything about this. I swear Ethan never told me what they were planning with you." Lucy had always been my favorite niece, a 29-year-old teacher who had stayed close to me even after Ethan drifted away. If I had known what they were going to do, I would have tried to stop them. I looked at her, seeing in her eyes the same honesty I'd known since she was a little girl. "I know, Lucy," I said softly, placing a hand on her cheek. "You've always been different. You've never seen people as opportunities or resources to be used." Her tears fell harder as she nodded, devastated by her brother's actions. "But why didn't you ever tell us about the money?" Lucy asked, genuinely confused. "Why did you keep all this a secret for so many years?" It was a question that deserved an honest answer, especially from someone who had always treated me with real love and respect. "Because your Uncle Robert and I learned long ago that money changes people," I explained as some guests discreetly leaned closer to listen. "We've seen families destroyed by inheritances, friendships ended by loans, and children who start seeing their parents as walking pensions. We chose to live simply to protect the relationships that truly mattered." Lucy nodded slowly, beginning to understand the wisdom behind our choices. "But Ethan, he was different before," she whispered. "When we were kids, he would have defended anyone who hurt you. What happened to him?" Her question carried the heartbreak of a sister who had watched her brother become someone unrecognizable. "What happened to him was Juliet," I said sadly, without bitterness. "What happened to him was greed disguised as love, ambition without values, and me protecting him so much that I robbed him of the chance to learn about responsibility and consequences." My words echoed through the ballroom, where the remaining guests hung on every syllable. Carlos had respectfully stayed back during our exchange, but now he leaned toward me and whispered, "Mrs. Hughes, the ballroom manager is coming. It seems he's been informed of the payment cancellation. Sure enough, I saw a burly man in a suit walking toward us with papers in his hands and a tense expression. "Mrs. Hughes," the manager said, "I just received a payment cancellation notice that's highly irregular. The contract for this celebration is guaranteed until tomorrow morning. Can you explain what's happening here?" His presence added a new layer of reality to the chaos. "Mr. Martinez," I said, remembering his name from when I had arranged the payment in secret. "The financial guarantee I provided for this celebration has been revoked due to extraordinary circumstances that have come to light tonight." I gestured toward Ethan and Juliet, who still stood in the center of the room like statues of despair. "I understand," Martinez said, looking around with the calm of a man who had seen a lot in his career. "And who will be responsible for the payment now? The total outstanding amount is $53,000, including the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography." His tone was polite but firm. It was clear someone needed to deal with the problem immediately. Ethan finally stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Mr. Martinez, there must be some misunderstanding. My mom, she can't just cancel the payment like that. We're family. This can be resolved." His voice carried a desperation I had never heard before, the desperation of a man finally realizing the scale of his downfall. "Young man," Martinez said with the forced patience of a professional, "the financial guarantee was provided personally and privately by Mrs. Hughes. She has the legal right to withdraw that guarantee at any time. I now need someone to provide an alternative payment immediately, or I will have to suspend the event." Juliet stumbled forward, her wedding dress now completely ruined, her makeup smeared with tears. "You can't do this!" she yelled at Martinez. "It's our wedding day! You can't ruin our wedding day over money problems!" Her hysteria filled the air, and several guests began murmuring uncomfortably. "Ma'am," Martinez said firmly, "I'm not ruining anything. I'm simply following the contract you signed. If you cannot provide payment immediately, I'll have to ask the guests to leave and suspend all services." His ultimatum hit the room like a final judgment. Reality began to set in. Some guests quietly grabbed their things and slipped out, while others stayed, captivated by the wreckage. "Mom," Ethan said, tears in his eyes for the first time since he was a child, "please, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but there are 130 people here. There are photos. There are memories. You can't destroy all of this over a fight." His voice broke again, and for a brief second, I saw the little boy he once was. "Ethan," I said calmly, surprising even myself, "I'm not destroying anything. You destroyed this when you chose greed over love, when you chose manipulation over honesty, when you chose to humiliate me instead of treating me with respect." Each word was sharp, but they needed to be said. "But what are we going to do?" Juliet cried, looking around helplessly as guests continued leaving. "How are we going to explain this? How are we going to pay for it?" Her panic was genuine now. She finally understood the real cost of her choices. "You're going to do what responsible people do," I said. "You're going to earn money honestly. You're going to live within your means. You're going to learn what it means to work for the things you want instead of expecting others to give them to you." My voice was strong, filled with years of hard-earned wisdom. Carlos approached and murmured quietly, "Mrs. Hughes, the legal process is complete. All documents have been delivered. There's nothing more we can do here." His words made it clear. It was time to leave, to let Ethan and Juliet face the consequences without me shielding them anymore. Lucy came forward again and hugged me tightly. "Aunt Aurora, I want you to know that you'll always have my respect and my love, no matter what happens with Ethan." Her words pierced straight through the walls I'd built around my heart. "And you'll always have mine, Lucy," I said, returning her embrace. "Remember this night when you face big decisions in your life. Remember that character is not defined by what we have, but by how we treat the people we love." Her tears soaked my shoulder as she nodded, completely understanding the lesson unfolding before her eyes. Martinez approached again, this time with greater urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need an immediate resolution. I have other commitments tonight, and I cannot keep staff here indefinitely without a guarantee of payment." His professional patience was finally running out, adding even more pressure to an already desperate situation. "You have my phone number," I said to Ethan and Juliet for the last time. "When you are ready to have a real conversation about respect, values, and responsibility, when you've learned what it means to earn things for yourselves, when you can look me in the eye and offer me a genuine apology for what you did to me tonight, then we can talk. But for that," I added, looking at them directly, "first, you'll have to find a way to solve the mess you created here all on your own." With those words, I turned and walked toward the exit with Carlos, leaving behind a ballroom full of chaos, despair, and the harsh reality of deserved consequences. 3 days after the wedding, my apartment had become a refuge of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Joseph had come over every morning with coffee and pastries from the local bakery, making sure I was okay after what he called the night Aurora reclaimed her dignity. His visits had been a balm for my soul, reminding me that I still had chosen family who valued me for who I truly was. The phone had rung incessantly for those 3 days. Ethan had called 37 times, leaving messages that evolved from initial anger to desperate pleading. Juliet had sent 14 text messages, each one more hysterical than the last. Her parents had shown up at my door twice, demanding that I fix the mess I had caused, but I held my ground with a calmness that surprised even myself. Carlos arrived that morning with news that, while expected, was devastating in its full scope. "Mrs. Hughes," he told me as we drank tea on my balcony, "I've received reports from all fronts. Ethan and Juliet were evicted from their apartment yesterday morning. The ballroom has initiated legal proceedings to recover the $53,000 owed. Their credit cards have been canceled for non-payment." "And where are they living now?" I asked, although a part of me already knew the answer. "With Juliet's parents," Carlos replied. "Apparently, it's a 2-bedroom apartment where 3 people already live. The situation is tense, according to my sources." His expression suggested that tense was a very conservative description of reality. That afternoon, while I was watering my plants on the balcony, I saw a familiar car park in front of the building. It was Lucy, but this time she wasn't alone. With her was Amelia, my old friend from the real estate sector, and to my surprise, Joseph got out of the back seat. "Aura!" Lucy yelled from the sidewalk. "We need to talk to you. There are things you need to know." When they arrived at my apartment, their faces wore a mixture of urgency and concern that immediately put me on alert. "Aunt Aurora," Lucy began, "I've been investigating some things since the wedding night, things I think you need to know before it's too late." She sat on my couch with a folder in her hands that looked as official as the one Carlos had carried to the ballroom. "Too late for what?" I asked, pouring her some tea while trying to stay calm. Amelia cleared her throat and spoke for the first time. "Aurora, for the last 3 days, I've been digging into Ethan and Juliet's financial situation. What I found goes beyond what any of us imagined. They had been planning this for more than a year," Amelia continued, opening the folder to reveal documents that made me feel sick to my stomach. "I found evidence that Juliet had been consulting with lawyers specializing in mental competency cases for seniors. They had a detailed plan to legally declare you incompetent and gain control over all your properties." Joseph, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward with a grave expression. "Aurora, there's more. That night after you left the ballroom, I overheard Juliet talking on the phone with someone. She said that the old woman had ruined everything, but they still had Plan B." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "Plan B?" I repeated, feeling my stomach clench with fear and anger. Lucy took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Aunt Aurora, they've been telling everyone you've gone senile. that the scene at the wedding was proof you've lost touch with reality. They're building a case for a judge to declare that you can't handle your own affairs. The magnitude of their betrayal expanded before me like an infected wound. It wasn't enough to have publicly humiliated me, to have planned to strip me of my home, to have conspired against me for months. Now they were trying to use my justified response to their cruelty as evidence of mental incompetence. It was wickedness beyond anything I had ever imagined. "But that's not all," Amelia added, her voice trembling. "I discovered that Juliet has been spreading rumors in the neighborhood about your erratic behavior. She has visited several of your neighbors, suggesting they report anything concerning they observe about you." The systematic nature of her defamation campaign left me breathless. Carlos, who had returned for our scheduled meeting, entered the apartment at that moment and found the atmosphere thick with tension. "Mrs. Hughes, I see you've already found out about some of the recent maneuvers." His expression was more serious than I had ever seen it. "I have some additional news that confirms what your friends have discovered. Ethan filed a preliminary petition yesterday," Carlos said, pulling documents from his folder. "He's requesting that a court evaluate your mental competency based on what he calls irrational behavior and erratic financial decisions. He's provided sworn statements from several witnesses who were present at the wedding." "Sworn statements?" I asked, feeling the anger begin to replace the shock. "What kind of statements?" Carlos consulted his papers before answering. "Statements describing your unjustified emotional outburst against an innocent young couple. Statements characterizing your financial decisions as vengeful and destructive. Statements suggesting that you've lost the ability to make rational decisions." Lucy squeezed my hand tighter. "Aunt Aurora, they've convinced several wedding guests to sign declarations. Most of them don't really understand what was going on that night. They just saw an old woman attacking newlyweds." Her voice carried the frustration of someone who had seen the truth but felt powerless to make it prevail. "But we have good news, too," Joseph intervened with a smile that contrasted sharply with the gravity of the situation. "It turns out there are more people on your side than they imagine." He took out his phone and showed me a screen that left me stunned. "Joseph, what is this?" I asked, looking at what appeared to be a social media video with thousands of views. "Aurora, remember that several guests were recording that night? Well, some of those videos have gone viral. People aren't seeing a senile old woman attacking an innocent couple. They're seeing a dignified woman revealing the truth about years of abuse and manipulation." Amelia leaned in to look at the phone, too. "Aurora, the comments on these videos are overwhelmingly in your favor. People are praising your courage, your dignity under pressure, your decision to set boundaries. Some are sharing their own stories of family abuse. You've become a symbol of resistance against the exploitation of seniors." Carlos nodded in approval. "This public response will be invaluable if the case goes to court. It's difficult to argue someone is mentally incompetent when thousands of people are applauding the logic and justice of their actions." His professional smile returned, suggesting that perhaps the legal battle wouldn't be as one-sided as I had feared. "But there's something else you need to know," I said, making a decision I had been considering for the last 3 days. "If Ethan and Juliet want to play this game, if they want to turn this into a public legal battle, then they're going to discover exactly who they're messing with." I stood up and walked to my desk where I had been preparing my own folder of documents. For these 3 days, I've been in contact with several lawyers specializing in elder abuse. I've been documenting everything: the intimidating visits, the implicit threats, the conspiracy to strip me of my property, even the slap Juliet gave me. I took out photographs of my swollen cheek taken immediately after the wedding, medical evidence of the physical assault. "If they want war," I continued, with a determination I hadn't felt in decades, "they'll have war, but it will be a war fought on my terms, with my resources, and with the truth on my side." "Furthermore," I added, with a smile that surprised even myself, I've decided to do something I should have done years ago. I'm going to tell my full story publicly. I'm going to show the world exactly what happens when greed disguises itself as family love. The room filled with new energy, the energy of people who knew that justice was on their side and that they had the means to make it prevail. 6 months after that night that divided my life into a before and an after, I found myself sitting in the most important television studio in the city, waiting for the interview that would tell my story to the entire country. The program Stories of a Lifetime had contacted Carlos after the wedding videos had accumulated more than 2 million views on social media. My story had become a national symbol of resistance against family abuse of seniors. The journalist, Catherine Diaz, a woman respected for her professional integrity, reviewed her notes while the technicians made the final lighting adjustments. "Mrs. Hughes," she said to me with a warm smile, "I want you to know that you've inspired thousands of people with your courage. We've received hundreds of letters from viewers who have lived through similar situations during these 6 months." Many things had changed. The legal case Ethan and Juliet tried to build against me collapsed spectacularly when Carlos presented evidence of their conspiracy to declare me incompetent. Not only did they lose the case, but they were fined for legal frivolity and ordered to pay my attorney fees, which amounted to $45,000. The bankruptcy that followed was swift and devastating. Ethan had lost his job when his employer found out about the public scandal. Juliet had tried to start an image consulting business, but the viral videos ruined her professional reputation. They were now living in a 1-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, working part-time jobs and struggling to pay their debts. "We're on the air in 5 minutes," the program director announced. I looked at the cameras that would soon broadcast my story to millions of homes, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. At my side was Carlos, who had agreed to appear with me to explain the legal aspects of the case. In the audience sat Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, my pillars of support during these difficult months. The most painful thing about these 6 months had been Ethan's complete silence. After losing the legal case, he made no attempt to contact me, no calls asking for forgiveness, no letters explaining his behavior, no acknowledgement of his wrongdoing. It was as if he had decided it was easier to hate me than face the truth. Juliet, on the other hand, had tried to contact me several times. Her messages had shifted from legal threats to desperate pleas for financial help. The last one, received just 2 weeks earlier, said, "Aurora, I know we made mistakes, but we're family. Ethan is sick with stress and I'm pregnant. Please, you can't let your grandchild grow up in poverty." The news of her pregnancy had been like a dagger to my heart. I was going to be a grandmother, but my grandchild would grow up in a home filled with resentment toward me. However, I had learned the hardest lesson of my life. I couldn't save people who didn't want to be saved. Trying to do so only perpetuated their destructive behavior. "Mrs. Hughes, we'll start in 30 seconds, Catherine informed me. I took a deep breath and thought of all the people who had written to me after seeing the videos, telling me their own stories of family abuse. Seniors whose children had taken control of their finances, parents emotionally blackmailed by irresponsible adult children, grandparents threatened with not seeing their grandchildren if they didn't provide financial support. We are live in 3, 2, 1. The red light on the camera came on, and Catherine began with an introduction she had rehearsed perfectly. "Good evening and welcome to Stories of a Lifetime. I'm Catherine Diaz, and tonight we have with us Aurora Hughes, a 68-year-old woman whose story has shocked the nation and brought the issue of family abuse against seniors to the center of a national debate." "Mrs. Hughes," Catherine continued, turning to me, 6 months after the events at your son's wedding, how does it feel to know that your story has inspired so many people?" Her question was direct but compassionate, allowing me to start on my own terms. "I feel grateful," I replied, feeling my voice steady as I spoke. "Grateful that something as painful as losing my relationship with my son has helped others in similar situations. For months, I felt lonely and confused, wondering if I was the one who was wrong. Now I know that what I went through is far more common than any of us would like to admit. Catherine nodded and glanced at her notes. Tell us about the years leading up to that night, when you first started realizing something wasn't right in your relationship with your son and his fiancée. It was the question I had been waiting for, the chance to explain how emotional and financial abuse develops slowly, almost without you noticing. It started with small things, I explained, remembering those early signs I had ignored out of love, comments about my age, suggestions that I couldn't take care of myself anymore, subtle pressures to make decisions that really benefited them. Family abuse rarely begins with shouting or blows. It begins with the slow erosion of your confidence, with making you question your own reality. Carlos leaned forward to add legal context. What Aurora describes is a classic pattern we see in elder abuse cases. The perpetrators, especially when they're family, use psychological manipulation long before resorting to direct coercion. It's insidious because it's disguised as loving concern. And the moment of revelation? Catherine asked. When did you decide to expose the truth about your financial situation? It was the question I knew would come, the one that forced me to relive my hardest decision. The slap, I said simply. When Juliet slapped me in the middle of the ballroom in front of 130 people because I refused to hand over the keys to my apartment. I knew she had crossed a line I could never ignore. In that moment, I realized it was no longer about protecting my family from consequences. It was about protecting myself from ongoing abuse. The interview went on for 45 minutes, covering every part of my story. I talked about my decision to live simply to protect my privacy, about the years of secret financial support I had given, about their conspiracy to declare me incompetent, and about the legal battle that followed. Each answer wasn't just about telling my story. It was about educating others on the warning signs and resources available. Mrs. Hughes, Catherine said near the end, do you have a message for your son if he's watching this interview tonight? It was the hardest question, the one I had dreaded and hoped for all at once. I looked directly into the camera, knowing there was a chance Ethan was watching. Ethan, if you're listening to this, I want you to know that I still love you. I will always love you because you are my son. But loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to abuse you. Loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity for their convenience. Loving someone doesn't mean becoming a victim of their greed. I took a breath and continued, my eyes welling with tears. The doors to my heart will always be open to you, but only if you can walk through them as the honorable man I tried to raise you to be. Only if you can look me in the eye and take full responsibility for your actions. Only if you've learned that family is built on love and respect, not on opportunism and manipulation. And for everyone watching who sees their own story in mine, I added, turning my words to the audience, I want you to know that you have the right to be treated with dignity, no matter your age. You have the right to make your own decisions about your money, your home, your life. You have the right to set boundaries with family members who mistreat you, and you have the right to seek help when those boundaries are violated. When the cameras turned off, the studio filled with applause from the crew. Catherine hugged me, tears in her eyes. Aurora, that was one of the most powerful interviews I've ever done. It's going to change lives. Carlos nodded proudly, knowing we had achieved something far greater than winning a legal case. That night, as I drove home with Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, I felt more at peace than I had in years. I had told my story, I had defended my truth, and I had used my pain to help others, no matter what the future held. With Ethan, I knew I had done the right thing. Aurora, Lucy said from the back seat, I'm so proud of you. You turned the worst experience of your life into something that will protect thousands of people. Her words echoed in my heart as we arrived home. The apartment Juliet had once coveted now truly felt like home again. Not because I'd won a legal battle, but because I had finally learned to value myself enough to demand the respect I deserved. I had discovered that sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to lose it. And as I prepared for bed that night, I knew I had set the most important example of my life, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, that you're never too old to demand dignity, and that true love sometimes requires the hardest decisions. My story had ended, but my life was just beginning again. 2 years have passed since that night that split my life into before and after. As I write these words, I'm sitting on the same balcony where I used to water my plants and reflect on the silent humiliations I thought I had to endure out of a mother's love. How different the world looks when you finally find the courage to put a price on your dignity. The morning began as they have for the past 18 months, with a call from Carmen, the coordinator of the Aurora Hughes Foundation for the Protection of Seniors. Yes, I decided to name it after myself, the organization I founded using part of my redirected inheritance. Aurora, we have 23 new cases this week, Carmen told me with that familiar mix of sadness and determination shared by everyone in this field. All similar patterns, adult children pressuring their elderly parents for property or money. Every case that crosses my desk feels like looking into a mirror of my past. Yesterday, I reviewed the case of a 72-year-old woman whose daughter convinced her to sell her house for her own good, only to learn the money went to a failed business and a vacation in Europe. The day before that, it was a 69-year-old man whose twins emotionally blackmailed him. If you don't lend us $50,000, you'll never see your grandchildren again. The irony isn't lost on me. I turned my worst personal experience into my life's greatest purpose. The foundation has helped more than 400 seniors regain control over their finances, their property, and most importantly, their self-esteem. We have specialized lawyers, social workers, psychologists, and a support network I wish I'd had when I felt so lost and alone. Joseph is still my dearest neighbor, and now also the foundation's vice president. At 72, he has more energy than ever, giving lectures about detecting family manipulation. Aurora, he told me last week, I never thought my golden years would include becoming a detective for dysfunctional families, but it's the best adventure I've ever had. Lucy moved into the apartment. Next door a year ago. After divorcing her husband of 8 months, she wanted to be close to the bravest person she knows. Working as the foundation's educational director has given her a purpose she never found as a traditional teacher. Aunt Aurora, she often tells me, you taught me that real family isn't always blood. It's the people who respect you unconditionally. The success of my public story brought unexpected results. The book I wrote with an investigative journalist, When Love Hurts, An Elderly Woman Fights Back, became a national bestseller, selling over 200,000 copies. All the royalties go directly to the foundation. The letters I receive from readers are living proof that my story resonated in homes where silence had been the norm. Carlos is still my financial advisor, but now he's also the foundation's lead accountant. His expertise from my legal battle with Ethan has been invaluable in helping others in similar situations. Mrs. Hughes, he told me at our last meeting, we've recovered more than $3 million in properties and savings that abusive family members had taken. The question I get asked the most, in every interview, every private talk, is whether I miss Ethan. The answer is complicated and painful. I miss the child he once was, the young man who showed glimpses of kindness and integrity. I miss the illusion of the family I thought we had. But I don't miss the manipulation, the emotional blackmail, or the systematic disrespect of those last few years. Ethan has tried to contact me exactly 3 times in 2 years. The first was 6 months after the TV interview, when his co-workers saw the show and began treating him differently. The The second was when his son, my grandson, Oliver, was born 14 months ago. The third was 3 months ago, when Juliet left him, taking the baby and half of what little they had. Each time he called, it was to ask for money. Never an apology, never an acknowledgement of the pain he caused. His mindset hasn't changed. He still sees his problems as the world's fault, not the result of his own choices. The last call lasted less than 5 minutes and ended when he said, "Mom, your pride is more important than your grandson." I replied, with a calm that even surprised me, "Ethan, my dignity is exactly as important as my grandson, and I hope one day he learns that lesson better than you did." It was the first time I'd ever hung up on my son, and strangely, it felt freeing. The topic of Oliver, my grandson, is the only one that can still make me cry. He's 14 months old and doesn't know me. When Juliet left, she took all the family photos, including the few I had of him. I've created a trust fund for his college education, managed by Carlos. It will be available when he turns 18, no matter what our relationship is by then. Maybe, Amelia tells me during our weekly dinners, when Oliver grows up, he'll want to find out what really happened. Maybe he'll find the courage to meet his grandmother. Amelia has become my closest confidant, especially since she, too, once had to set hard boundaries with toxic family members. What surprises me most about these 2 years is how much my physical and mental health have improved. During those years with Ethan and Juliet, I suffered chronic insomnia, headaches, and anxiety that kept me constantly on edge. My doctor says my current tests show the stress levels of someone 10 years younger. Aurora, Dr. Hernandez told me during my last checkup, it's amazing how the body heals when we remove sources of toxic stress. Your blood pressure is perfect, your sleep is restorative, even your posture has improved. He's right. I walk taller now. My voice is firmer. My hands don't shake when I make big decisions. The flower shop where I once worked closed a year ago, but I found a new passion in the community garden I helped create in my building. I teach other seniors about medicinal plants and organic gardening. It connects me to the earth and to people who value wisdom instead of seeing it as old age. My routine now includes 3 days a week at the foundation office, 2 visiting seniors who need emotional support, and weekends spent writing my second book. This one focuses on practical ways to detect and prevent financial abuse, based on real cases we've handled. The apartment that was once a target of greed is now a haven of peace and creativity. I've turned Ethan's old room into my office, where I meet people seeking guidance. The walls are covered with thank you letters, family photos, and certificates from universities where I've given lectures. One of the most rewarding parts of this new life is mentoring older women who've faced similar pain. Margaret, 74, came to us 6 months ago after her son sold her car without permission to pay gambling debts. We worked together for 3 months, and last week she sent me a picture of herself smiling beside her new car, bought with her own savings after winning her case. "Aurora," she wrote, "you taught me that setting boundaries isn't cruelty. It's survival. You taught me that self-love isn't selfishness. It's necessary. You taught me that it's never too late to stand up for yourself." Her words reminded me why all this pain had been worth it. Looking back, I understand that my story doesn't have a fairy tale ending where everyone reconciles and lives happily ever after, but it has something far better. It has authenticity, reclaimed dignity, and a purpose that goes beyond my pain. I've learned that sometimes the greatest act of love for yourself is walking away from those who keep hurting you. If I could send a message to the Aurora who walked into that wedding ballroom 2 years ago, I'd say, have courage. What's about to happen will be painful, but on the other side is a life more real and free than you ever imagined. Peace awaits you. The peace that comes from knowing you'll never again let anyone treat you like you're disposable. Tonight, as I finish writing these reflections, I look toward the future with renewed hope. Tomorrow, I meet with senators to discuss new legislation to protect seniors from family abuse. Next week, I'll inaugurate the Foundation's third regional center. Next month, I begin a national documentary series on the same issue. My life at 70 is richer, fuller, and more authentic than it was at 68. I've learned that the end of a toxic relationship isn't a loss, it's liberation. True family is chosen as much as inherited, and it's never too late to write a new chapter in your story. When people ask me if I regret what I did that night, my answer is always the same. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked it, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep sharing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I can't wait to read your thoughts. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story, with love and respect.